The Lord of the Rings Online is making changes to the Ember system some players are calling pay to win. If we look over on the forums, we can see a post by Cordovan that was made yesterday, and it talks about 4 major changes that are coming to the Ember system. The first point is we are significantly increasing the cap on these currencies. For example, Embers of Enchantment will now cap at 100,000, 10 times higher than it is now. That, at first glance, seems like a fantastic change. Good on them for making that, until you consider some of the changes we're about to get to. Point 2. There will be no currency barter exchange between these currencies. Motes and emotes will no longer convert to Figments of Splendor. That's kind of a bummer because there are currently no real ways to get Figments of Splendor other than festivals, and as a player who doesn't do festivals, really frustrating because Figments of Splendor can get you housing items among other things, and I really don't have a way to get that. With the upcoming Erebor housing system, it would be really nice to have more ways to get Figments of Splendor so I could actually decorate the new premium housing if they actually want me to buy it. On to point 3. When we increase the level cap or during other large item level intervals, all of your existing Embers of Enchantment will automatically become motes. So I do think that there are times when Embers of Enchantment do need to become motes so that players aren't just instantly getting all the best gear in the game. Especially now that the cap is at 100,000, I do think that this move needs to happen. One thing that I would like to note is that motes will now actually be changing right away as far as the gear that's associated with them. So like gear that you would have been getting for Embers will instantly, when the move happens, now be motes. And so it still lets that player get the gear they were going for, which I think is actually good that they're making that change because they've already been doing the Embers to motes anyway. So it's nice that they're now also making the gear go to motes right away. That's actually a good change. Point number 4, the controversial point. The sources of Embers of Enchantment will continue to change as our newest content changes. The only gear that disenchants into Embers will come from Adventurers' loot boxes. Yeah, you heard that right. The only gear that can now be turned into Embers is gear from loot boxes. There have been so many people posting about pay to win on the forums in response to this. It is a very long thread with a lot of players talking about pay to win. There's 5 pages already, and this announcement was made less than 24 hours ago. A lot of players talking about pay to win and their concerns with it. Some players, of course, defending the actions and things like that, as you would expect. Not everybody agrees, but there has been quite an outcry over this change, and I think rightly so. They had a great system with the Embers system. I think it made a lot of sense. It allowed players to get caught up if they had gotten behind. And it also allowed, long-time players to still advance as well. Before I get too far into this, I would like to say that if they had gotten rid of the Ember system completely, not had a loot box option or anything like that, I personally would have been much more okay with it because I can see the point of view of the, hardcore raider that doesn't want players to be able to get caught up with Embers and things like that. They just want, players that get the drops and stuff like that. I know that for some players, the Ember system was actually viewed as not a good one because they viewed it as players trying to, get shortcuts instead of, actually grinding out the content. Personally, I actually really liked the Ember system. I thought it worked really, really well. I'm very disappointed that they are getting rid of the gear disenchanting. I think it was a great system. If you got something that you didn't want or couldn't use, you still felt like you were getting some sort of loot that was useful because it would be able to be turned into Embers. And I think that that was actually a great idea. And they're just throwing all that away to get people to buy loot box keys, I guess? It doesn't really make sense to me. In my opinion, this seems like a very clear move to pay to win, especially when you consider the fact that the cap is now 100,000 on Embers. That to me suggests that they now want players to, be not impeded in how many keys that they can buy and can just, continue to buy more and more keys to open these Adventurers loot boxes as they make their way, beyond 10,000 Embers. When you combine these two changes, it seems very clear that Standing Stone Games is moving to a pay-to-win model, where they want players to pay to get the best gear in the game. Of course, you can still get gear from raids and instances that drop there. You can also still get embers from doing dailies and weeklies. But removing the ability to break down gear that you get that's useless into something useful is a huge mistake, I think, especially when you combine that with them seeming to promote loot boxes as the replacement to the gear breakdown system. That is ridiculous to me. It's clear pay to win in my opinion, and I think players on the forums got it right. It seems very clear that this is indeed pay to win. Of course, players can completely ignore these loot boxes, which I hope they do, but in practice, usually pay to win actually does work. People use the system. And I think that this is going to really degrade the value of raiders' gear when they know that someone else can just pay to get it. Honestly, I'd be even more okay with this pay to win system if it was like actually buying the gear, but you can't even actually just buy gear. You have to go through loot boxes, which means you're actually gambling to win, which in my opinion, gambling to win is even worse than pay to win. At least with pay to win, you know you're going to get the thing that you want. This instead is using loot boxes, which the Houses of Lords seem to suggest in Britain that this is indeed gambling. And if this is indeed gambling, I feel like gambling to win is way worse because you don't actually necessarily get the item you're wanting when you open something like a loot box. If LOTRO's loot boxes work differently and they're actually just a selection box, because I haven't used their loot boxes, so I actually don't know. If it is actually a selection box, they should call it a selection box instead, but they have tied themselves now with the loot box term, and so as far as I'm concerned, this is gambling because they've associated themselves with a gambling term. Of course, the option to gamble in LOTRO was available already, but now they have made that be the only way to get embers from gear. And in my opinion, that is clear gamble to win. I think it's a huge mistake. It already seems to suggest that a lot of players are at least taking a break, if not stepping away from the scene now, because of this change. Over on Bullroar, today launched update 3 of Bullroar, and it actually has some more Embers news. Reclaiming the Mountain Hold weekly now rewards 1,500 Embers of Enchantment, up from 500. And Challenges of Gundabad weekly now awards 1,500 Embers of Enchantment, up from 500. These weeklies are thankfully getting more Embers of Enchantment. It seems like that they're moving away from the gear-based system. If you're going to, get rid of the option of players to be able to get Embers from gear, you need to have some sort of a replacement. This is going to be way less Embers than what players could acquire before. Interesting comments that I saw from people on the forums was that they were saying, well, Standing Stone Games, now that the cap is raised, could actually make gear cost more now as well. So even though that they're raising this here, Standing Stone Games in the future could just raise the cost of Embers gear, which could, of course, cause issues down the road where you're actually getting way less Embers than before. And so it seems clear to me that, the grind is getting worse in LOTRO, and the solution is to have players pay to get rid of it. So even if Gundabad was incredibly successful, a change like this seems to suggest that it wasn't. It seems like this is just a move to make a quick buck because potentially maybe Gundabad didn't do as well as they thought. It certainly lends players to think that way, as I'm sure many players would. So if nothing else, this is poor timing and bad PR in my opinion. So if Standing Stone Games continues to make changes like these where they increase grind just so that they can get players to spend more money, I really don't think they're going to be around for very long. At some point, if raiders find themselves where the only way to progress is to pay money, they might just leave. And then if enough players leave, there will be no point to pay to win anymore because there will be no one to play with. Let me just say that I really hope that the changes EG7 is hoping to make with graphics and other things in LOTRO will be big enough to make changes like these not matter. So those are the 4 Embers changes coming to LOTRO with update 32. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these changes, and as always, thank you so much for watching.